to talk a little bit about virtual reality. Then the main subject is going to be experiencing non-physical reality, because I think that's what most of you are here doing. The reason you're here is to experience non-physical reality. So we're going to talk about that in many different ways. Okay, MBT is a model. Okay, it's a model, it's a scientific model. And if you've read the books, you know that I constantly say, don't confuse reality with the model of reality. And that seems simple. Okay, this here around us, this is reality, and what I'm talking about is a model of reality. Seems like that's a real easy differentiation to make, but it's not really so easy. Scientists get confused on that point every day, and they're the ones that are supposed to be understanding this reality at the greatest level of detail. What we do in science is we tend to make models of things. We model how things work, okay? Because we can only measure events, we measure effects, we measure results, but the reason for those results, the cause of those results, we don't measure. You can't measure a cause. You see, you only measure a result. Well, you measure a result and then you assume or make a model to explain the cause. And after a while, if you aren't paying attention, you begin to believe that your model is real. And then you confuse the model of reality with reality. And now that's how scientists do it. Of course, everybody does the same thing. We're born into a culture. This culture has beliefs, ways of looking at things that model for us reality and the way reality works and how we should interact within it. And we take on those beliefs, and pretty soon that model of reality is reality. It is just that way, is how we feel about our cultural beliefs. It's not that we think they're beliefs. We think that's the way it is. So the simple idea of don't confuse reality with the model reality is really not so simple. It's a hard thing to do. It's hard for everybody, and it's hard for scientists too. We tend to believe our models. We may not believe them, at least scientific models, right away, the first few years they were made, but as time goes on, they become more and more real. I'll give you some examples. Like particles, electrons, are a model. No one's ever seen an electron. We see the effects of electrons. We measure the effects of electrons, and then we say, well, this effect looks like as if there was this little piece of mass with a charge, and we'll call it an electron. But that's just a model, you see. But then eventually we begin to believe that electrons really exist. There are all these little chunks of matter with charges that fly around and do various things, and they become real to us. And look at all those electronic gadgets around here. They all work on electrons, right? So electrons have to exist. The concept of an electron as a little piece of mass with a charge is just a model. Don't confuse it with reality. You see, and what makes a model a good model is whether or not it answers all the data. By that I mean, does it explain all the things that we measure, all the things that we experience? If it explains all the data, all of our experience, then it's a good model. If it only explains part of our experience, then it's only a partly good model, you see. And what we found out, of course, in science is that if we think of an electron as a little piece of mass with a charge, it falls short. It doesn't explain all the things we see. And then we realize it can't be a little chunk of mass with a charge, that the model was wrong. Otherwise, we wouldn't have things like entanglement, things like the double slit experiment. We wouldn't have any quantum mechanics if electrons were little chunks of mass with a charge. So they're not, they're not real, but it's a convenient metaphor that we use to describe them. The same goes with your cultural beliefs, with your personal beliefs, your religious beliefs. Whatever you believe falls into that same kind of category. It's as if that belief were true. Okay, now, my big toe is not an easy model. Okay, there's several rather major, even dramatic, I would say, paradigm shifts that are required to get there. And many people, if not most, are unable to profitably use this model simply because it conflicts with their current beliefs. And that will apply to many of you here too, as we talk about these subjects like ways to get non-physical entities, who are they, and other such topics that we have, typical problems, and is it real? That if what I tell you conflicts with your beliefs, you will have a very strong tendency to find reasons why it doesn't apply to you, why it isn't really the whole picture, and why the belief that you have is really the best way to look at it in the first place, because that's just the way we're made. When we get data or information that's not in consonance with our beliefs, we discount it. We let it go. Okay? And the only way to combat that is with what I call open-minded skepticism. You have to be open-minded about everything, but you have to believe nothing. Completely open-minded and skeptical. Well, you might ask, does MBT represent my current belief? And I'd say, no. I don't believe a word of it. Not one single word of that MBT. My big toe. A scientific model isn't something you believe or disbelieve. It's a theory that either works, fits the data, which means fits your experience, okay, or it doesn't. It's either useful, provides a better, more thorough or coherent explanation of the facts. I think somebody else has got a lecture going on here too. Is that you, Pamela? All right. Okay. It's the facts that count, not belief. The facts decide whether a model is good or not good model. So I say I don't believe in it. That means I don't hold it as a belief. See, any good model ought to be a living model. That means you should be skeptical of it. And if it doesn't fit a piece of data, then it's not a comprehensive model. And you have to change it or modify it or make it bigger. So it has to be open, it has to be able to grow, it has to be a live thing that can change as our understanding and as our data comes in. So no, I don't believe it, and I would caution you not to believe it either. But what you should do is take the things I say today and match them against your own experience. I'm talking about non-physical reality a lot here, so you've just had a bonus amount of experience with non-physical reality, I suspect, in this past week. So you will have a lot of data that you can judge it against. The next thing I want to talk about is hard problems. You've probably all heard of the hard problem of consciousness. If you haven't heard of that, what they're referring to there is that how do inorganic particles go together in groups and combinations that ends up being conscious. And that's called a hard problem because the people who study consciousness have no clue how that might happen. How do you take a bunch of particles and end up with consciousness? Well, it's not only a hard problem, it's an impossible problem. So some of the thinkers in this field say it's probably impossible. It's an impossible problem. We'll probably never be able to do that. But there's lots of conjecture about it. Oh, the brain is full of microtubules that have quantum effects that, whatever, but then it's all just kind of goes into the air and it doesn't really say anything. It's just kind of conjecture. So lots of conjecture, but actually no really good ideas of how to solve the hard problem. Well, of course, the hard problem's a hard problem because they're looking at it the wrong way. Consciousness is not made up out of physical particles. That's not where consciousness comes from. So you will never find out how that actually happens because it doesn't happen. Well, there's some other hard problems that I'd like to mention. Physics has a whole bunch of hard problems, and you might be surprised of some of these things being in the category of hard problems. But the hard problem with consciousness is basically what is consciousness? Where does it come from? Okay. Mass is a hard problem. What is mass? Where does it come from? Charge is a problem. What's charge? Where does it come from? Space. Where does space come from? What is it? Spin is one. And time. Okay, all of these are hard problems that scientists really have no idea what these things are and where they come from. They just are. Okay, so they're all hard problems. Well, it turns out if we go back in history and look at the hard problems that we had in history, it turns out that there's a very consistent underlying cause of hard problems. One hard problem that's historical, of course, was flat Earth. Right? It's a very hard problem because anybody who was around then said, well, the Earth has to be flat because we have these oceans, and if it were round, all the water would run off the edges. The oceans would be dry. How do you keep oceans in on a round planet? It'll just fall off. And how would anything exist down on that underside of that sphere? Everything would fall off. So the Earth cannot be round because when we travel around on our boats, we don't see everything kind of leaning over because it's falling off. Everything seems to be on a flat surface. And that was a difficult thing. So it made it a real hard problem. And of course, what was missing was that they had no concept of gravity. It was just that they had the wrong paradigm for looking at the problem. Now, they had lots of facts that said the Earth was round. They noticed when a ship goes off, you see the whole ship. As it gets a little further out, you only see the top half. It gets a little further out, you only see the top of the flag. It gets a little further out, the flag disappears. It looks like the ship is sinking in the water as it sails away. And they were sailors. They had seen that 1,000 times. They saw the shadow of the Earth on the moon. What's the shadow? It's a curve. It wasn't flat. So they had this evidence that said it's not flat, it's round. But that was impossible. It didn't make any sense, you see. So it was a hard problem. Just like it's impossible to make consciousness out of particles. How does that work? So another one was the Earth at the center of our solar system. It seemed reasonable because you look out and you see the sun goes around, the moon goes around. Even at nighttime, the stars go around. So they're obviously going around the Earth. They go down in the west and come back up in the east, and they keep doing that. So we obviously are in the center of this stuff that's going around us. Again, the problem was one of perspective. The way you look at the problem, it needed a paradigm shift. In fact, a study of history will show you that all of the fundamental hard problems were problems of paradigm shift. They're problems of perspective. As soon as you got the right paradigm, the right way of looking at the problem, then the solution was trivial. The solution was obvious. Okay. So that's the same with our science today. We've got these hard problems: consciousness, mass, charge, space, spin, and time. And all of these become trivial, become easy to understand once you have the right perspective. And the perspective that science has now is not the right perspective. That's why they're difficult. The belief in physics now about, say, the double slit experiment and entanglement and those sorts of quantum effects, tunneling, there's a whole set of those effects, is that we'll never understand it. It's just the way it is. Reality's just strange that way, and nobody will ever understand it. You see, it's the same sort of thing as the flat Earth. It's just the wrong perspective. Once you have an idea of this being a virtual reality, a computed reality, then all of that just makes perfect sense. Well, of course it's that way. That's the way it would have to be. You see, it makes all those experiments understandable from a logical process. So I'm going to explain the model just a little bit. Try not to make this too long. Basically, MBT is a model of consciousness. It's a consciousness model. Then it turns out that once you understand consciousness, everything else falls into place. If you understand consciousness, you understand metaphysics, you understand theology, you understand physics. Things that previously were hard to understand, a lot of conjecture. These things start to make sense. Okay, so it's about consciousness. And it starts with two assumptions. One is that consciousness exists, and the two is that this process called evolution exists. Neither of those are very wild assumptions because here we are, we're conscious, consciousness exists, that's pretty obvious, and we see that evolution is a thing that affects everything. Technology evolves, monetary systems evolve, cultures evolve, and critters and plants on this planet evolve. The solar system evolved, the universe evolved. We can see that evolution basically is a fundamental process that affects every large system that is self-changing, a system that can change. Then evolution is the kind of the driving force for that change. Things change in order to better suit the environment that they're in and better suit their purpose. For biology, that purpose was survival and procreation. Okay, so start with a system that has awareness, that's our assumption of consciousness, but not the kind of consciousness we think of as conscious, just a very primordial consciousness. You might say a kind of a prototype for consciousness, a system that just is aware enough to realize that it can exist in this state or that state, two states, okay? But it's aware of that. It says, all right, here I'm this way and there I'm that way, and I kind of can tell the difference. It feels a little different which way I am. So that's an amount of self-awareness. So that's my assumption of consciousness. Okay? But that's not really what consciousness is. It's not just self-awareness. It's more than that. So if it can be aware of a couple of states, then it can eventually say, well, if there's a this way and a that way, then there could be also this way and that way and that way and this way, and there's all kinds of ways then that it can evolve to have. If it's capable of distinguishing between two things, it's capable of creating more of those things. And of course what I'm leading up to is that this way and that way is a binary pair. Okay, so we're talking about ones and zeros, if you will. So if a system can be aware of states, then it can be aware of multiple states, and it can be aware of binary pairs. Now, they don't have to be binary. That's just an example because everybody understands ones and zeros and binary, how that relates to information. So that's just a metaphor that we're using here. Right, so what does this system do? And there's some mathematical things that we can do that kind of builds us up to this point, and how did this thing exist and so on, but I won't go into these here because this is just a short summary. But in any case, what would a system like this do? Well, this is an information system, right? This and that is information. Not a lot of information, but it's information. An information system, if it evolves, it means it continues to exist. If it de-evolves, it means it loses that information and now there's nothing but randomness. Randomness means it really can't distinguish this from that. It's just, whatever it sees, it's just random. It doesn't see a this and that, it seems randomness. Okay, so an information system evolves by decreasing its entropy, which means increasing its order, its structure, its information. You see, information is structure. Information is pattern. If I say up, down, down, what's next? Up. How'd you know that? Because we had a rule. We just generated a rule. It's a series of ups and downs. So the next one after down has got to be up, because that's the pattern. You see, that's information. So patterns represent information. Information doesn't have to be language or mathematics. All right, so this system then generates information. And it generates patterns, and perhaps patterns of patterns, but a pattern requires a rule. Okay. So as it generates patterns, it's making rules and rule sets about how these patterns behave and how these patterns might relate to each other. It can do that as much as it likes, but it's still not consciousness in the way we think about it, because it's aware now, and it's aware of lots of ones and zeros. It's aware of some simple kind of local rules for patterns, but it isn't until it gets to the point where it realizes that being one thing limits you terribly in lowering your entropy. There's not that much that you build as one thing. Whereas if you have several things that interact, that can cooperate in an interactive way, that gives you a lot more novelty, a lot more ways things can go together. Because not only do you have all those internal states of yours, but that other thing has internal states, and your internal states and their internal states can make patterns and things that didn't exist before, you see? So you get a lot more choices, a lot more things. It's a lot more structure, a lot more potential for organization. And physical things did the same thing. The physical world got to the same point. You had one-celled organisms. Well, they evolved about as much as they could as one-celled organisms, but it's limiting. What did they learn to do? They learned to multiply. They learned to add, not multiply just yet, but they learned to add and cell divide. So they learned arithmetic, it seems. And then they cooperated. Okay, so now they had 2 single cells that were cooperating with each other, and then 3, and then 4, then many-celled things. Well, they found if they had many-celled things that were cooperating, they could make a bigger cooperative organization that met the constraints of their environment better. Okay, more survivable, more able to procreate. So that was good, because they had this more novelty, more choices, more things they could be. Therefore, they could pick the ones that were most survivable, you see. So it's the same way. It's just a natural state of the way evolution works on complex systems. It doesn't have to be biology or consciousness systems work that way. It's when you evolve, you evolve toward states of lower entropy. High entropy is random, no structure, no rules. Low entropy is order, structure, rules, building, cooperation, all takes lower entropy. So that's what information states do. So it broke itself in a lot of pieces so it could interact with each other. And now it needed not only a local rule set for a pattern, it needed a rule set so that it could interact with these pieces. The pieces have to interact so they can share information. What did it need? It needed a language. It needed a way to share data. Otherwise, it wasn't helpful. You just have a bunch of individual things that never interacted, you see. So that's no point in that. That's not an evolutionary advantage. There's an advantage in sharing. So the first virtual reality, the first rule set, if you would, that creates a virtual reality was this ability to communicate with the pieces. All right, so that's a VR. Now at that point, that virtual reality, that rule set that allowed communication, allowed consciousness to be as we think of it now. Now you have something that has decisions to make, and it can share and interact with other pieces of consciousness. And based on these interactions, it can change what it chooses to do with the decisions in its decision space. So now we have a full up consciousness. So that's the idea. Now once you have a consciousness and it has a simple virtual reality, it eventually says, that's nice, but I can do better. I'm evolving, and as I evolve, I can make a more interesting virtual reality, one in which there's more traction, more interaction, not just entity sharing data with entity. Okay, that's like think of 10,000 people in a chat room, no rules. You can call yourself anything, there's just no rules in this chat room, and there's 10,000 people in it. Well, you see there's not a lot of real interaction there. Everything is kind of loose and false. You can say anything to anybody about anything. You can claim to be things you're not. There's very little attraction in that. So the interaction is weak. So you want more rules, more structure that defines a more sticky, if you will, interaction. So there's lots of things that you share and trade, not just data. Lots of different forms of data, like sight, hearing, touch, smell. There's lots of data that you can trade, lots of ways, not just information. All right, and so that's then a more complex virtual reality, and I call that a virtual reality with a tight rule set that is what we live in. This is our universe, is a virtual reality. It's got a rule set. Well, where did it come from? And what's this rule set? Well, this virtual reality that we live in was not programmed. It evolved. If you program something, you're stuck with what you program. If you evolve it, it just develops however it needs to develop to go on, you see. One is dynamic, the other is static. In World of Warcraft, which is a virtual reality video game, every tree and blade of grass is planted. And if they want to move it, then they have to go in and change the code and move it or put in something else. They have to go in and do it. Whereas in one that evolves, the stuff just evolves. You give it initial conditions. You give it a rule set, which is our physics, biology, our science, right? Those are all the rules of how things can interact. All the energy exchanges that can happen between things is the rule set. And then you just let it run. Well, that is what I call the big digital bang. You start with the initial conditions. Your initial conditions are very tight, very small volume of plasma at a very high temperature, okay, and a very high pressure, and it's all packed together in a little spot. And you have rules, things like gravity and force and pressure, those kinds of things, all these rules. And then you hit the run button and see what happens. Well, this high pressure, what does it do? It expands, and as it expands, it cools, and as it cools, things pull together into lumps, and then you have stars, and then you have planets, and you have all this. You have a physical universe that just evolves, and then on one of the planets, you have just a few chemicals come together, different elements. You end up by chance with an amino acid, the right kind of thing, and you get a cell. Why would you get a cell, a single cell, living cell? Well, living's kind of in quotes at that level. It's not, it's just a cell that can maybe replicate because that is a lower entropy configuration. And we can do the same thing mathematically. If you've ever heard of Conway's game of life with cellular automata, they do the same thing. They come up with a little rule set and some rules about how you change black and white squares on a checkerboard, and then they let it go. And they create, just with these simple little rules, not complex rules, but simple rules, they can create systems that move, that go on forever, that just keep regenerating themselves, that can share data. They can have structures that basically replicate themselves. If it's here, then it's here, then it's here. So as you see it replicate itself, it looks like it's moving off in a different direction. And they've shown that these cellular automata with the right rule sets can implement a general purpose computer. In other words, they've got all the right stuff they need, all the right computer science DNA, if you will, to be a general purpose computer. They can have memory, they can do logic choices, So you can see how this might evolve. All right, so that's the idea of virtual reality then. We live in a virtual reality. It's our universe. And when we think of virtual reality, we think of a computed reality, right? It's computed. It's evolving in a big computer, if you will. It's a simulation, a calculation space with a rule set. Okay. The rules define how things interact, provide a consistent structure, a context for choice and experience. The key idea here is that if you're not in a virtual reality, you don't have any context for interaction. You're just by yourself. There's no context. There's nothing to define language. There's nothing to define data moving. There's nothing to define any kind of interaction unless you have rules that say how that interaction has to take place. Okay, so that turns out then that virtual reality is necessary to the evolution of consciousness. No virtual reality, you're not going to end up with a consciousness system. Now, we have a very complex virtual reality, which wasn't created the first day consciousness had its first thought. Obviously, it evolved a long time before it created reality like this for individuated units of consciousness, me and you and everybody here, to play in. All right, let's kind of jump to the bottom line there, and that is the virtual reality rules of interaction creates a context that enables the free will choice and its consequences to exist within a consistent framework called a reality frame. Virtual realities are fundamental to consciousness, just as time and free will are fundamental to consciousness. So you can't have consciousness without time. It's a fundamental requirement. Why? Because time is a measure of change. This state, then that state. That's change. Just being able to differentiate. Now I'm in this state, then I'm in that state. I've changed. It's different. If it's different, you've defined time. Okay? But if you have a before and after state, you have time. If you have a decision or multiple decisions, then I have before I made this decision and after I made that decision. Before I made this choice and after I made that choice. So you can't have choice, which means you can't have free will unless you have time. And you have to have free will because without free will there are no choices. There is no such thing as choice. Choice requires free will. If there's no free will, then there's no choice. You just have things happening the way they have to happen. You know, it's all done. It's a deterministic thing that has no change. Well, what do you call something that never changes? You call it dead, right? It's certainly not alive. It just sits there. It doesn't change. It's even maybe deader than dead because, you know, a rock, you'd say it doesn't change. A rock under the ground just sits there, it doesn't do anything, and it's dead. But even a rock slowly dissolves or builds up or changes in some way with time. But a deterministic system does not. It's just a fixed system with no change. So you can see the virtual reality, free will, time, and consciousness all go together as a logical set. So you'll often hear this thing about time. Time is an illusion. There is no such thing as time. The past, the present, and the future all happen at the same time. It's all nonsense. It doesn't make sense. You have to have time. You have to have change. You can't have evolution without change. Just the word evolution means change, a process that creates change. So you have to have time. And change happens in an arrow, right? You have before and after. And before has to happen before, after. So you have before and after, and then the next thing, and that all goes kind of in a line with time, right? Time has to move forward. You can't have the past and the present and the future all happening at the same time. Doesn't make any sense. Where's the before? Where's the after? What's time? And our experience doesn't support that kind of thing. That's a common idea. So I wanted to kind of get that idea out as the summary, and that's about all I'm going to do for summary. Okay, now I'm going to explain a little bit about virtual realities to kind of just hit three main points about virtual reality, and then we're going to go into experiencing the non-physical. First point is consciousness makes the choices, and the body, the avatar, sets the constraints. Think of playing the game World of Warcraft. Okay, you're a player, and you're playing an elf that does whatever things do in World of Warcraft, mainly fight and run around and go on quests and find out data and kill things and that sort of thing. That's what your character does. Okay, but you're playing that character. Where's the consciousness? Who's making the decisions? You are. The person at the computer with the mouse, okay, and a screen is making the decisions. That's the consciousness. Is the elf conscious? No, the elf's not conscious. You're its consciousness, right? You, the player. The elf is just there to set the constraints. Your elf can only have so many spells and so many hit points and jump so high and run so fast and take so much damage. There's all these constraints, and the elf represents the constraints of what you can do within the rule set that defines the World of Warcraft world. You see? So that's the body. That's the body that's playing. It's the elf's body. It's the elf that's doing the running around and jumping and climbing and fighting and whatever. The elf's the body, but you're the consciousness. Now there's something interesting about that, and that is, could the consciousness ever exist inside the World of Warcraft world? In other words, could consciousness reside inside the World of Warcraft world? And the answer to that is no. It has to reside outside of that world. Why? Because the world is generated by a server, right? World of Warcraft world is generated by a server. The consciousness has to be in the same reality frame as the server, not as the elf, because a virtual reality cannot compute itself. Does that make sense? You see, you have to have a server creates a reality, but the server can't be inside the reality. The reality can't compute itself. The server has to be in a different reality frame than the virtual reality that it creates. So the consciousness needs to be in the server's reality. Well, that's what we are, right? We're in the server's reality. That's where the people are that did the programming and run the computer, and we're the people, so we're the consciousness for that elf in the World of Warcraft. For us, it works the same way. That's just a basic tenet of virtual reality and consciousness. Okay, so here we are in these bodies. Is this body us? No, it's just like the elf. This body is just a computed thing, just like the elf body. It's just computed. So here we are, we have this body, but we, who you are and I am, we're consciousness. We're a piece of consciousness sitting at the controls, if you will, with the mouse and the keyboard, making all the decisions. See, that's what you do for your elf. You make all the choices. The elf doesn't make any choices on his own. If you just leave the elf alone, he just sits there, maybe dances a little. He just sits there, wobbles, and doesn't do anything, right? The only way he does something is you make a choice. Move, walk to the left, walk to the right, jump, dance, go talk to this person, go on a quest. You are the consciousness, make all the decisions. You have the decision space. The elf doesn't have any. And you have to be outside of the elf's reality. Same reality as the server. Okay, so here we are in this virtual reality. Our consciousness, has to be outside of this physical universe. Can't be in it. Same logical reason. Because the server has to be outside of the virtual reality that it creates. So consciousness has to be non-physical. If we define physical as this physical seeming virtual reality, that's physical, and everything else is non-physical, then consciousness has to be non-physical. It can't be physical. It can't be from the same reality as in the game. Consciousness has to be in the server reality. All right, so that's one interesting thing about virtual reality. So you might think, well, if our body is just computed, like everything in this physical reality, it's just a computation in a virtual reality, just like World of Warcraft, except it evolved and wasn't programmed like World of Warcraft, then how come it is that, if you get hit in the head with a bat and it does brain damage, that now your mind doesn't work anymore? The consciousness has changed, right? Well, then the consciousness must somehow, be constrained by the body, because you hit this body and now you limp. Your left side of your body doesn't work anymore. You can't walk, and you slur your speech, and you don't remember things. Doesn't the body change consciousness? No, the body changes the constraints. You get hit in the head, you have brain damage, that creates new constraints. And you, the consciousness, have to play the figure, to play your avatar within the constraints of your avatar. Your elf jumps off a cliff and gets hurt. Well, you have to now play the hurt elf. You lose hit points or whatever hurt means in that context. You have to play that damaged being then. And that's the way it is here. So what the body does, what the physical environment does, is set the constraints. We can't jump 20 feet in the air. We can't run. We can't fly faster than a speeding bullet, and leap tall buildings in a single bound. We don't do that sort of thing because the rule set doesn't support it. So we can only do what the avatar can do, and the avatar can only do what the rule set allows him to do. Same with the elf. The elf can't flap his arms and fly either because it's not in a rule set, doesn't support it. Okay. So that's why, we see it looks like you got hit in the head and that affected your consciousness. It's not like that. You got a hit in the head, that changes the constraints, which affects what the consciousness has to play with, has to deal with. Okay. Now, an interesting thing is that physics is being pushed toward this physical universe being a virtual reality by their own experiments. Physicists are being pushed that direction. Their experiments are telling them this is a virtual reality. It's just information. And experiment after experiment comes to the same conclusion, is that we can explain this experiment best if we assume that this reality is virtual. So virtual reality in the physics community is now a serious thing. There's probably, I just take a guess, no survey was done, but I'm guessing that probably 25-30% of all the physicists out there in the world probably take virtual reality as very serious science. 10 years ago, not so. But now that's true. And that's because they find out that electrons don't act like little chunks of mass with charge. Electrons act like a point with the attributes of mass and the attribute of charge, just exactly like they'd be in a simulation of an electron. If we simulated an electron in a computer, it would be a point with the attributes of charge and the attributes of mass. But would in our computer there be a little chunk of mass running around in our computer? No, it's just virtual mass. See? So it's becoming more and more acceptable and better science to see our reality as virtual. I mentioned this earlier, but I'll say it again. We measure results, we measure facts, we measure effects, and then we assume the causes of those results, effects, and facts. And the assumptions become models of reality. It's how we model reality, as if it were a mass. You see? So that's how virtual reality works, and I'm trying to give you some information so you'll see that this idea of virtual reality isn't entirely crazy and bizarre, that it actually seems to make sense, and it explains a lot of modern science that isn't explainable any other way. All right, let's get into the main subject, which is experiencing non-physical reality. That was just a short overview of kind of the MBT theory, if you will. All right. First, I want to define some terms. These are terms that I use. I'll try not to use the acronyms. I'll just say them because otherwise acronyms confuse everyone, unless you happen to work for the government. Then you're used to acronyms, but everybody else struggles with them. An IUOC, which is an individuated unit of consciousness. I've already mentioned individuated unit of consciousness. Okay, that and its derivative, which is a free will awareness unit, which is an FWAU, free will awareness unit. Acronyms, right? Anyhow, both of these, the point I want to make here is that, we have a sense of what these are from the metaphysical literature. An IUOC, individuated unit of consciousness, we call that oversoul, higher self. That's kind of the metaphysical translation. And a free will awareness unit, that's us. That's our little chunk of personal consciousness that we define as ourselves. So we call that the soul, or I often call it little c, or local consciousness, as opposed to big C consciousness, which is the whole larger consciousness system. So it's easy to get confused when you talk about consciousness, which is your local consciousness, or consciousness, which is the big system. Okay, so that's those two things we want to talk about. Well, the point here is that they're just metaphors. Again, let's not get trapped like the scientists do in believing our own metaphors. Okay, they're just metaphors. They're functional metaphors, so they describe structure. We try to explain how consciousness works with us, and we have certain functions that we need to incorporate in that explanation. One of the functions is that since consciousness evolves, it has to have a continuing awareness, right? Evolution takes time. Growth takes time. You don't just get like, okay, you want to grow up, I'll give you one chance. You start from an infant and now grow up. All right, you should be grown. It just doesn't happen like that. You have to grow through stage after stage after stage after stage. It's a cumulative process of evolving and growing up. It's cumulative. So you have to have some place that accumulates experience. That's the job of the individuated unit of consciousness. It's the accumulator. And you also have to have the thing that's experiencing. Not necessarily the accumulator, but the thing that's actually doing the experiencing. Okay, well, that function is what we represent by the free will awareness unit. So you see, these two things are just metaphors for those two functions, because we know those two functions exist, so we give them names, and now we can talk about them, but then don't start thinking that there are these little things and they're there. That's believing your own metaphors. That's making your model of reality and then believing that it's reality. So we don't look at these things as actual things, but as metaphors for functions. Okay. If the cause of a fact, and I said a fact, the result, or an effect is what we measure. If the cause of that fact lies beyond our direct sense perception, I would include in that direct sense perception our tools, our microscopes and telescopes. So that's all part of our direct sense perception. Our explanation of the cause can logically be no more than a model, right? So if the cause is beyond our direct sense perception, and the sense perception of our machines, then the cause of that can't be any more than a model or a metaphor. That's why, if we look at the things that are very small, like the electrons we talked about, okay, when things are very small, we can't directly see them, sense them. So what do you end up with? Particle metaphors. Electron, it's just a metaphor for an effect. Okay, so all the particles we have in particle physics are just metaphors. They're not real things, just metaphors. Okay, let's see, what else we would have beyond our direct sense. Invisible things that just happen, invisible, action at a distance it was called. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance. have something here, then there it is, and it didn't move or anything. You know, you just got this stuff all over, but it doesn't seem to be connected. It's invisible. You can't smell it, can't touch it, can't see it, but you measure it and it's there. Well, we call fields, are action at a distance metaphors, electrical fields, magnetic fields, gravitational fields. Our concept of field is a metaphor for something, for effects that we measure that are beyond our direct sense perception. Okay? And then another big thing that's outside of our direct perception is consciousness. Why? Because it's not in this reality, right? It's non-physical. It can't be in this reality. It's not logically possible to have consciousness in the same reality, the virtual world. We just went through that. So because consciousness falls in there, we have metaphors for that too. Soul, higher self, guide, God. We have all sorts of metaphors that represent that sort of stuff. So again, this is just logic. This is really just very simple logic. We have to do that because that's the only thing that makes sense. But it's like that. So we don't want to be caught like the scientists who believe in their metaphors, and then they think their metaphors are real, and then they do a double slit experiment, and they say, I just did this double slit experiment with an electron, and electrons aren't massy little particles because they don't act like it. Electrons act like probability distributions. What does that mean? Nobody will probably ever know. You see? So we don't want to get stuck. You don't want to get stuck with your ideas of oversoul, soul, higher self. Don't get stuck with those as real things. Those are metaphors, and metaphors only. All right. So how does that work? How do we actually end up being connected to this avatar? Well, again, this is a functional model now. Just the functions we know that have to happen. So an individuated unit of consciousness creates a free will awareness unit by partitioning off a fundamental being level subset of itself and does not connect that subset to its own virtual reality data stream. Okay, so that means that implies that initially the free will awareness unit is just potential consciousness. Okay, because it's disconnected from the parent's virtual reality data stream. But it still is carrying its parent's full potential. So it's a piece of it from what I call the being level. The intellectual level is where you're processing the data and analyzing and sort of things. So from the being level, that's just the essence, okay, the quality of that individuated unit of consciousness, but not the specific experience base of that individuated unit of consciousness. So you have this little chunk of basically potential consciousness. That's what it starts. You are this free will awareness unit. Okay, so you begin as a potential consciousness with the same potential quality as your parent individuated unit of consciousness, but you are not connected to and are temporarily blocked from any virtual reality data stream of any sort. So you thus have no history, you have no choices, you have no experience of your own. You're just potential. You're not conscious, rather only consciousness potential at this moment. But in the next moment, your potential is brought to life, or rather brought from potential consciousness to full consciousness by connecting it to a virtual reality data stream that delivers a choice with free will. Now you're in a virtual reality. Now you got rules. Now you got, if you do this, that happens, because these are rules. There's interactions. You do something, there's an interaction. There's reactions to that. So now you're interactive. You start building up experience, a history, and all that sort of thing. Okay? Okay, in our case, our free will awareness unit is fully immersed in a physical reality, virtual reality. Now, again, that's a virtual reality that has a tight rule set, so it seems like this one is just so much connectedness between everything that it feels physical. That's how we define physical. Okay, a virtual reality, say an out-of-body state, doesn't have that strong a rule set. It's a very weak rule set. There's only a few rules there. So everything's much, there's much more degrees of freedom there than here. So that's different. Okay, so let's see. We're immersed in this physical reality, virtual reality data stream. Okay, and that's constrained. Our experience now is constrained by an avatar, which is constrained by a rule set. We've said that before, so this all should be kind of clicking together. Okay, so then this consciousness, this free will awareness unit now begins to have experience, make choices, and accumulate a history with this specific experience packet. It's in a specific experience packet. It experiences itself as a fully conscious being in physical reality. Just like you experience your elf as a fully aware elf, right? It's not aware. That's just a virtual elf. But you, the consciousness, that's your elf you're running around. It does whatever you want. It jumps when you say jump. It stands still when you let it stand still. So that's the same thing. So now this free will awareness unit has this avatar body in this virtual reality we call our physical universe. And it's limited by what that virtual body can do. And it's limited, that body, what it can do is limited by the rule set. Okay? So, what is it? It's an infant human. Well, probably depends on how you think of infant. It's probably aware and has input coming before it's born in utero. So it is aware, it has information, it can do things, it can have experience, it can do flips and punch its mom from the inside out. It can, it has decisions to make, things that it can do. Not many, very broad, big ones, but it does. All right, and then it's born and so on, and it has to experience this physical reality and learn everything from scratch about how to function here. Okay. It carries along no useless intellectual baggage. And a lot of people would think, well, why not? Well, it sure would be great if I could remember all this stuff so they don't have to start over all the time, but it's useless baggage. There's a couple of reasons why it's useless baggage if you brought anything more other than just the quality that you've earned. Okay, the quality that you've built up over all the incarnations that you've had. Well, it's useless because if you came with that intellectual information, instead of playing the game and building the experience, you'd be gaming the game. You'd say, oh, I remember that. That didn't work out too well, so I'll do this or I'll do that. It's all coming out of your intellect, but your growth doesn't come out of your intellect. In other words, you could learn to game the system, but it wouldn't cause you to grow any. To grow, you have to change who you are. It has to be growth at the being level. You don't grow from the intellect. The intellect can maybe help point the direction and help lead the way, but you actually have to become different to grow up. It's not just an intellectual exercise. So if you carry all this intellectual stuff with you, it would just get in the way of your ability to make honest decisions that express who you are. In other words, you might act kind, but you wouldn't necessarily be kind. You'd only learn to act kind because you know that worked better. So you would be more civilized perhaps if you carried that stuff with you, but you wouldn't necessarily grow up any. Because acting kind isn't what it's about. It's about being kind, and those are different. You learn to be by being who you are and seeing the consequences of that. That's how you learn. Not by acting some way other than you are. That's just image. So we leave all that junk behind. Besides that, imagine how difficult it would be if you came back here with memory of the last, 3,000 husbands or wives that you had, and the 6,000 children that you had, and all the parents and grandparents and all the other people you loved and were dear to your heart, and you've got all of that. It just accumulates. Wouldn't that be a little overwhelming? Sure. It would not allow you the freedom to just be who you are, which is what we do here. We just be. And when we be, that's an interaction. It causes reaction. It causes things to happen, and then we can learn from the feedback. So that's why we have to let all that stuff go. It just get in the way. It would be preponderous, and it would be dysfunctional. Besides, we tend to paint ourselves into corners. We gather beliefs and ideas about the way things are, and we get a little more, that stuff gets a little more set in stone the older we get, and eventually our ability to change and grow gets smaller and smaller and smaller, where it's time to start over. Start over where you still have all the quality you've earned, because that evolution is cumulative, but you don't have all the baggage. You just now can act and grow and be and become, and that's why we do it the way we do it. Okay, let's see. I think we're done with that. Now let's talk about non-physical experience. We're going to kind of a new subject. Let's just assume that you are a capable, functioning free will awareness unit, each of you. Okay, right? You are awake in physical reality. That means you're immersed in the PMR data stream. Now, all physical reality comes to you in the form of a data stream, just like it does when you're the consciousness playing the elf. That reality comes to you in a data stream. The data stream sent out of the server comes to your computer, displayed on your screen, and you interpret it as the scene with the trees and the rocks and the rivers and all the rest of it, the houses and the other people. You interpret that based on your experience. Okay? You've gained that experience since you were an infant. So now you can look at that screen and say, oh, that's a rock. Oh, that's a person. Oh, that's a house, because you were an infant and learned all those things and what they were. So now you get to interpret that data stream, and it's the same with this reality. You started as an infant. You got this data stream from the server, and you learned how to interpret that data stream in this interactive game. It's a river, that's a rock, that's a person, and the relationships between those things. So you learn to interpret the data from the data stream, just like you do when you're getting it out of a computer. Okay. So here you are getting a data stream, and next we'll just assume that you're going to start to turn off that data stream. You turn it down, down, down to where you're just now ignoring. You're shutting off your data stream, which defines this physical reality. So let's say you turn it all the way off. You find that even with your data stream turned off, there's still data streaming. It's still available to you, because you are a fully aware consciousness connected to the larger consciousness system, like all fully aware consciousness. So you find there's something else out there. Well, why didn't you notice that before you got connected, to this virtual reality? Because you had no experience before. Remember, we didn't take that experience with us. We just took the potential. So without the experience, data means nothing. It's just noise. Until you learn how to interpret the data doesn't mean anything. It's meaningless noise. So now you have grown up here in this virtual reality. You've learned how to meditate. You've done a few things like that. And now, when you push that data stream aside, that virtual reality, physical virtual reality data stream aside, you find there's other stuff out there. Surprise! There's another whole world, another whole reality out there. Okay, you may be dreaming. Okay, then you have a data stream from the larger conscious system. You may be meditating, and then you have just point consciousness. You drop off this data stream that defines this physical virtual reality, and you don't pick up any others. You drop them all off, and now you're just a consciousness floating in the void. No thoughts, no process. You only have one awareness, and that's I am. And you're floating in the void. Okay, that would be the meditation state. You might be having an out of body, and you could be getting your data stream out of the larger conscious system or out of the database. I haven't talked about databases yet, but I'll define those in a little bit. Lucid dreaming, that would be a database coming out of the larger conscious system. If you were remote viewing, that would be coming out of the database. Channeling could be coming out of the larger conscious system or the database. Death, okay, that would be a new data stream from the larger consciousness system. Okay, or you simply may be just creating your own data stream, your imagination, your consciousness, you can create data streams too. That's what consciousness can do, and you're one of them, so you can create data streams. We call it imagination. That's another data stream. Okay, and I talked about the databases, and the two databases that I'm talking about are called the past database and the future probable database. And what they are is when you build up a virtual reality like ours here, this physical reality, it requires some work along the side. It's not just a simple thing to do. And one of the things that you have to do in order to make this viable is you have to keep records, because it's hard to learn if you can't look at the past. It's hard to grow if you don't know what's happened. So you keep records, and that's the past database. But now this is not a deterministic virtual reality. It's not like World of Warcraft is deterministic to some extent, but this is mostly a probabilistic. So is World of Warcraft. And, when you take a swipe at something, it's a throw of the dice. It's a random process that tells you whether you hit or missed or whatever. So it's not all deterministic either. But this is a probabilistic reality. And so you have this past database. It's everything in this. This database would be just for all the critters here on this planet, let's say. Just look at that part of the database. Everything that's been done, thought about being done, every emotion, every feeling, everything that is captured in this database, everything that happened, and the probability that it might have happened. Okay, so it's not just everything that did happen, but everything that could have happened, and the probability that it would happen. Now, the future probable database is everything that could happen, and a probability that it will. Okay, so we have these two databases. The future probable database is required because the system has to have some idea of what's likely to happen next, because it's generating all of this data. It's generating the whole world right out of a server, and it's really helpful to it if it knows where it's going. That every second or every millisecond isn't a total surprise. So it needs to keep track of where it is and what's likely to happen next, so it can be ready for whatever's likely to happen next. And another thing that I didn't mention is that your intent has the property that it can modify the probability of the future. So you have an intent, and with this intent, you can change that probability a little bit, depending on how focused your intent is, how much effort you put into it, what intensity you have, depending on how it depends on the probability you're trying to move. But if the probability you would like to change is 1 in a million, you may do a terrific job and change it from 1 in a million all the way up to 1 in 1,000, and it still doesn't happen. Even though you've increased the probability that it would happen, you didn't increase it enough because it was such a long way to go. On the other hand, if it's something that, it's about a 50-50, could go this way, could go that, then you can move it just a little bit, and it might make a dramatic difference in the way things happen. So it's not that you control everything with your intent, but you change the probabilities. You can nudge those probabilities up or down based on your intent. Okay, so that was part of the model that I didn't mention. Okay, here's an interesting thought. Experiences of dreaming, meditation, out of body, lucid dreaming, remote viewing, death, all the things I said, are all like the experiences of the blind men examining the elephant. Remember that story? You had 4 or 5, I don't remember how many blind men, and each one walks up to an elephant, different part of the elephant, and the one grabs the tail and says, "Oh, an elephant's like a rope," and the other one gets a leg, "Oh, the elephant's like a tree trunk," oh, and hits the side, an elephant's like a wall, and so on. So they get all these different impressions of an elephant because they're only seen from a particular perspective. Okay, well, that's the same with us. But in our case, the elephant is the larger consciousness system, and the various descriptions we get from out of body, lucid dreaming, remote viewing, meditation, and dying, those descriptions are in terms of metaphors that are greatly colored by our expectations and our personal beliefs. Just like with the blind men. So we see all kinds of different things because we're looking at it from different perspectives. We're looking at one thing, and that's the larger consciousness system. So what I'm trying to get across to you now is don't have your ideas of this larger system be fragmented. Oh, there's this, and then there's this, and there's all these different things. And see, there's really a holistic connection between all these things. A lucid dream and an out-of-body are brothers, they're first cousins or whatever. It's the same thing approached from a different viewpoint. And the biggest difference between them is what the people bring to it. If you come to that experience with certain expectations you've read about in a book and you know that this is the way it's supposed to be and so on, then that's the kind of experience you'll have, because that's what you will see as true. And you'll filter out anything that doesn't fit that. That's what you'll do. You'll have those limitations. So it's the biggest difference between them is how you get there. One of them you stay conscious all the time. The other one you lose conscious, then come awake later. Right? In your dream, you become aware of your dream. So your path getting there is a little different. But the biggest thing is that your expectation and limitations, your beliefs are different. And that colors it. The basic phenomena are all the same at the root. And that is you've dropped your data stream for this physical virtual reality. You've connected to a different data stream. It's the same in all of them, all right? So it's not like, well, here's where the out-of-body people go, and here's where the lucid dreamers go, and there's this wall between them, and they don't have the same kind of experiences. They're all different, and we don't want to section things off like that. It's really all the same thing. All right, so we'll get down to number one here. What is non-physical experience? Well, in detail, it's the data. Non-physical experience is a data stream. And you get an outside data stream mixed in with an inside data stream, and you interpret the result of that mixture. Now, an inside data stream is the data that you make up, called your imagination. The outside data stream is the data that comes to you from outside of you. Okay? That data comes out of the larger consciousness system. You get both of those, and then you interpret what they mean. All right. The problem with interpretation is that people want to interpret intellectually, not intuitively. They want to second guess. They want to try to make sense out of things. So they judge, they analyze, and they say, oh, that doesn't make any sense. That wasn't true. Oh, this does make sense. It must be this way. Well, what makes sense and what doesn't make sense isn't really connected to what it is that you're getting. That's just your interpretation, how you color that data. And the next question is, well, how do I know what's inside data and what's outside data? How can I tell the difference? Well, there's two ways. One is kind of the first step and not really as important as the next. But the first is, if you look at the data, is this information that could come from you, information that you could create? Or is it something so foreign to your mind that you know it didn't come from you because that's just not in you? That's the first test. And a lot of times you'll get stuff that's like that. That just wasn't a part of you. You never would have thought of dreaming up this. It's kind of outside of your ability to imagine. But the final thing is, the most important thing is it's the wrong question. Can I believe it? And which is the wrong question. It doesn't matter where it comes from. What matters is it useful? What can you do with it? What can you learn from it? How does it help you grow up? How does it help you be different? That's important. Because if there's something that really helps you be different, and it's coming from inside data, so use it, right? Grow with it. If it's something that really is useless and it's coming from outside data, why is that superior? You see, it doesn't matter where it comes from. Let that go. What matters is just take the experience, absorb it, and grow from it, learn from it. How important is it? What's it telling me? That's how you judge the value, not whether it's inside or outside or where it came from, or was that a smart entity that told me, or did that entity not know anything? Right? What you're doing there is you're trying to find out about the source so you can determine whether or not you should believe it or not, right? Well, that's That's making it a belief. Oh, I see. This guy, has a PhD in physics. He tells me about physics. I'll believe it. This guy flunked out of third grade and has never been to school, can't read or write. He's telling me about physics. I don't believe anything he says. You see, we tend to do that as a shortcut. Vet the source and then decide whether we believe it or not based on the source. It's not a good idea. It's a bad idea how to go about it. You don't want to do that. And we do that when we meet entities and things. We want to know, is that my imagination or what? If it's my imagination, I don't care. If it's something else, that's important. That's nifty. And if that's something else really smart, then that's even better yet. But we don't want to do that. What we want to do is say, having this experience, what I do as a consciousness is I have experience, I try to learn from it. Doesn't matter where it comes from. Not really important. That's just your ego wanting to use a trick to decide whether you should believe it or not when you really shouldn't believe anything, remember? Don't believe anything. All right, we'll get on to that point. Let's see, but in the big picture, non-physical experience just represents experiential opportunities in reality frames other than this physical reality, experience which you get to make choices to evolve your quality. Every one of your adventures in the non-physical, you get to make choices because that's what the game's all about, is making choices. And the choices you make there are just like the choices you make here. They're things you can grow from. Was it a good choice? Was it a choice that moves you closer to becoming love, or a choice based on fear? Was it a fear-based choice? You see? So all of these realities are equivalent. It's not that this physical virtual reality is superior to the dreaming virtual reality, to the out-of-body virtual reality, to the lucid dreaming virtual reality. It's all just data streams. Data streams from the larger conscious system, and every one of them is as real as the other one. And every one of them gives you an opportunity to make choices, and all of those choices give you an opportunity to evolve the quality of your consciousness by making better choices. Choices away from fear, away from ego, away from expectation, wants, needs, desires, and stuff, all that stuff that grabs you and holds you back. It's your opportunity to make choices that move you away from that. So think of all of these realities, not as necessarily a place to play, but as a place to learn, a place to grow up. All right, the second one was, why is non-physical experience the way it is? Well, if you've turned off, or at least turned down, your data stream in the physical reality, you naturally and inevitably end up in point consciousness or in some sort of interaction with the larger consciousness system, the databases, or yourself, right? So you let this reality go, you still end up in some sort of interaction with something else. And that interaction has choices. Choices give you opportunity. Opportunity should not be wasted. Okay. Now, the data stream you get is strongly affected by, one, your fear and ego. Okay? That's all the scary stuff. Monsters, disasters, intrigues, plots, fighting evil entities, saving the day, winning the battle, all that stuff that you do. Okay, that's mainly fear and ego stuff. Or it could be strongly affected by your expectations, what you read in books, what you hear other people say. Lots and lots of people read Bob Monroe's books, and then they tried to have Bob Monroe's experience. You can't have Bob Monroe's experience. You have to have your own experience. And if you're trying to have Bob Monroe's experience, you're losing your opportunity to grow from your own experience. So if you want to go to the park that Bob Monroe goes to in the non-physical, you see, you're trying to have his experience, because his park may be your desert or your rowboat in the lake or your something else, you see. So you don't want to have his experience, you want to have your own experience. And don't discount and sell short your experience because it doesn't match up with what you read in the book, you see. And many of us try to say, well, wow, that was a really good experience. It was just like so-and-so, and I read this, and I'm really doing well. And you judge yourself doing well by how well you had somebody else's experience who wrote it in a book. You see, that's the wrong way to judge. It's the wrong criteria. You don't want to do that. Have your own experience. What does that experience mean? You had choices, your own personal choices to make to get to that experience. You see, it's not the experience that's important. It's the choices you made while you were in the experience that was important, not the experience itself. The experience itself is just the drama. The choices you made, those were important. Okay. So attitude, the attitude you go into it with, your culture, your personality, all of those things will make a difference. You right brain or are you left brain? You approach information differently. Your culture, are you a culture that supports kind of non-physical tripping, or are you in a culture that doesn't support it? Makes all the difference in the world, how you approach your information. Belief, personal beliefs, cultural beliefs, scientific beliefs, all change what you get, how you interpret the data. And your intent. Intent is a really big one that's mostly overlooked. Is your intent precise and focused, or weak and undefined? A lot of people don't have an intent. They just want to have a good time. They want to see something cool. They want to have an experience that's just really amazing, and they don't really have an intent or focus. Okay, so, and the very last one is it's strongly affected by your ability to process, interpret the data and information. And that's because the larger conscious system is not going to give you information you can't process. So how do you get rid of that constraint? Well, basically you need to, get rid of the junk. The junk is your fear, your ego, all that stuff that kind of like, cement brick tied to your back while you're trying to swim. That's all the stuff that weighs you down and keeps you from a good interpretation, keeps you from actually getting the data. Okay, so another thing is that your non-physical experience may be the result of a data stream sent directly to you by the larger conscious system. Remember, this is your personal link. Just like when you're playing World of Warcraft, the data you're getting to your computer, no other computer anywhere on the planet gets the same data stream you get. Some of them may be similar, but each one is unique and personal. That's your elf, and you're getting the data of what that elf is seeing and doing and so on, and nobody else gets that. So your data streams are all unique to you. So the larger conscious system wants to get in touch, give you a little hint, create an experience for you that gives you an opportunity to learn something. You just may get a direct, specific message or learning opportunity. And it may be in the form of a dream, could be an out-of-body experience, could be a daydream as well as a night dream. Intuition, an epiphany, doesn't matter. You're always on duty. Whether you're asleep, whether you're awake, whether you're focused or not, you're always on duty and you're always connected. Okay, now in the big picture of that why is non-physical experience the way it is, non-physical experience simply provides another experiential reality frame, that is a VR, in which you get to make choices and evolve your quality. Evolution is your job. That's why you exist. If you're dropping out of physical reality awareness for whatever reason, then another learning lab, another experiential VR will take its place, because you're on duty all the time. You're learning everywhere you go. And as I said, all virtual realities are real. One can essentially wander cluelessly through all available reality frames all the time. Consciousness evolution, driven by free will, can be an extremely slow process, but it doesn't have to be. All right. The third one is, what are the sources of non-physical experience? Okay, well, one would be other non-physical individuated units of consciousness, right? We're all individuated unit of consciousness, and we're all netted. All of individual units of consciousness are netted. Not only the ones on this planet, all 7.5 billion of us, we're all netted, but all individuated units of consciousness. Some that have never been to this planet, some that have never incarnated into a physical kind of universe. We're all netted. But our net is turned on and turned off with our intent. Okay, it's just like the internet. You don't get all, 10 billion web channels all at once on your screen. You wouldn't be able to see anything. It'd all be such a jumble, it would just look like white noise because you get everything at once. Well, that's the way it is. Your intent is to type in www dot and an address that then gets you one channel. Well, we're like that too. Our intent opens and closes what we get, the data streams, and who we're connected to. We can connect to lots. You can open your channel and get everything from all 7.5 billion of us, but it just sounds like kind of a roar in the background. It doesn't make any sense. Or you can focus on just one individual. And if other people are sending you things that you'd rather not get, you can turn it off with your intent. Okay, so intent is what turns that on and off. Okay. If you are engaged and paying attention, the larger consciousness system will deliver to you the exact opportunities you need for your continued growth just as soon as you are ready for them. Okay? So if you're not getting that, then it's likely that you're not sufficiently engaged or paying attention, or you're not sufficiently ready. Most of us meander through life, both in non-physical life and this physical life, in a mesmerizing dance with our fear, our ego, and our beliefs. And we don't pay any attention to our choices. We just make them and don't even think about them again. We're mesmerized by the story and forget about the choices we're making and why we're making them. Okay. See, the larger conscious system is interested in your personal evolutionary success because you're lowering of entropy, you're raising your quality, your evolution of the quality of your consciousness is its evolution, raising the quality of it and its consciousness, because you're a part of it. You're just a piece of it. So all these little pieces, as they grow up, the whole thing gets a benefit. Okay, so that's why it would like for you to succeed. And that's why if you're ready and willing and able, you'll get the challenges you need, you'll get the experiences you need to learn from. If you're not ready, then you probably think you are, because people who are not ready are sure that they are. People who are ready are just open to whatever happens. If you're convinced that you're ready, that's a good sign that you're not. Sorry about that. That's sort of the way that is too. All right, next one, 4. What's the meaning or significance of non-physical experience? Okay, your experience is your individual personal data stream. Now, this is a good one to remember. You get what you need and deserve. Okay, what I mean by that is you get the opportunities that you require to grow up and that you're ready for. Those are the opportunities that will come to you. Your experience, in many ways, is custom made for you. It seems random, I know. It seems random. The out-of-body experiences you have, the experiences you have here seem very random. Things just happen. But the experiences you get are, for the most part, custom made for you, and you help make them by your own intent and the feedback and how you modify future probability, and you're part of the creation process that makes things for yourself. So if you have a lot of fear and ego, that creates a lot of not so much fun challenges that come your way to deal with fear and ego. See? So you get what you need and what you deserve, and I don't mean that in deserve like punishment or something, but it's basically what you require to grow up. And the same can be said of all experiences, of course, in any reality frame. So, okay, in 5 we said, is non-physical experience real? Well, your physical experience is data. Your non-physical experience is data. It's information. Information is as real as it gets in the larger consciousness system that is an information system. So we tend to have this attitude, oh, this is the real reality, and a virtual reality is kind of the fake reality. It's the reality we make up. It's not real. It's virtual. Well, the dream reality, the out-of-body reality, this physical reality are all virtual realities. They're all equally real. Okay, is it real? Is this information, data stream real? Well, you may put inside data that using your imagination, outside data could get all mixed together. And of course, the way you get rid of a lot of that inside data so it doesn't confuse you is that you learn to meditate, you learn to quiet your mind, you learn to get rid of all the noise that you have in your mind all the time. If you get rid of that noise, that's where this outside data comes from. What happens if you're not experienced? Well, I'll back up and say it differently. When you first started to meditate, my guess is you were told to not have any thoughts. Just be still and don't think anything. If you have a thought, let it go. Most of you probably lasted 2 or 3 seconds before the first thought came in. And then you said, oh, that's a thought, and you put that away. And there's another 2 or 3 seconds before the next thought came in. That's just a typical experience. We have these thoughts that are coming in all the time, and people feel like they're really great meditators if they get like 10 minutes, without a thought coming through. Well, you need to have all those thoughts gone. As long as it takes, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, whatever you want. That's the kind of discipline you have to have with your mind, because when you are experiencing things, if you're out of body, if you're lucid dreaming or remote viewing or anything else, it's all the stuff that comes into your mind that ruins it. That's the inside data. And it's all the intellect that's judging and assessing. And is this reasonable based on what I know? Like you know enough to tell whether or not that was reasonable. You don't until you get the data for a long time and assess it. Then maybe you can judge it. You do have to judge, is it useful? Eventually. But even that you can't say for maybe months, maybe a year. Depends on what you're getting. You have to be with it and experience it and see what you're going to learn from it. And then you can say, well, I didn't learn anything from that. I've been talking to this non-physical entity for 3 months now and really haven't learned a thing. Might as well let that go. And I don't care if that's the king of Siam or the Lord of the universe or whoever it is that they said they were. Let it go. It's just not working out for you, you see. So it takes time though. But if you make judgments right away, then you lose the possibility of learning. So take all your experiences at face value. Just an experience. Now, what good is it? What do you get out from it? What can you learn from it? That's what's really important. Okay, see where is it real? Okay, virtual reality is the only kind of experiential reality there is. You have to have a virtual reality. You are consciousness. You cannot experience if you don't have a virtual reality to experience in. The virtual reality has the rules that create the context for the experience. Okay. Let's see, we've done all that. The larger consciousness system defines rules to create virtual realities to provide context for choices. Okay. Now, as long as you are a free will awareness unit in this physical reality, all your other virtual realities are launched through this virtual reality. Okay, virtual realities come in layers. And what I mean by that is, you come into this reality and you gain experience. Okay? You start as an infant, you experience things, you decide what that experience means, what's important and what's not. And with that information, with with your own database of experience, is how you interpret the data streams that you get. So when you interpret a data stream and an out-of-body, you interpret in terms of your database that you collected growing up here on planet Earth. So there's a lot of things you might get out of body have nothing to do with planet Earth, but you're going to interpret them in terms of your experience here on planet Earth. You'll twist them and fit them to something that you can compute here from your experience base, because that's all you know. If it's outside of your experience base to the point that you can't come up with any kind of pattern match for it at all, then you don't even see it. It's like it wasn't there. That data stream goes right through. It's invisible to you. The only way it's visible to you, the only way you can process it, is to somehow put it in terms of what you experience here. That's why so much of what you get resembles what you see and what you know here, because you have to interpret it from here. Okay, so if you're out of body and you are doing something out there and your body is lying in your bed or sitting in a chair and somebody pours a bucket of ice water over your head, what happens? You're no longer out of body. You come right back here, right? This is the fundamental launch pad for all your early excursions. So you have to pass through here to get there, because here's where you learn to interpret data streams, and you use that interpretation for all the data streams in all your virtual realities. So this is your fundamental place where you start. This is what defines your history, your experience, and everything gets interpreted in terms of this physical virtual reality. Okay? So you've got a huge bias here. And if that data set that you have, that's your experience, is full of fear and ego and beliefs, all that just twists your interpretation all sorts of ways. It ignores some data, it makes bigger out of other data, it interprets according to your beliefs. So what you get is not necessarily, what's there. What you see is not necessarily what's there. What you see is a reflection of yourself in what you got in the data stream. So that's something to keep in mind as you fly around in the big reality. Okay, let's see. All right. Now you could, and this is a good point that I don't want to make. That I don't want to make. This that I do want to make. That I don't want to miss, but I do want to make. See, you're a free will awareness unit, and your plane of PMR, physical matter reality, a physical reality avatar. So your consciousness playing this avatar, that's your body, who sets the constraints on you. But this avatar, and you, through this avatar, your consciousness, has chosen to learn how to meditate. Right? So now that opens up to you, because you, the consciousness, playing through this avatar, one of the things the consciousness can do is learn to meditate. Can learn to go out of body. Can do that. Okay, but you, the consciousness, have to develop that ability and that experience. To do that through this avatar. That's why this virtual reality is your base reality, and that's why the cold water always brings you back here, because here's the launching pad for everything else, and here's the filter through which everything else is seen. Everything else is done. Okay. You could, if you wanted to, you could be out of body and then go out of body, out of body. In your out of body state, you could leave that state and switch data streams. Okay, but now that would be a lot of complication that's unnecessary, wouldn't it? Because all you'd really have to do is just switch data streams. You see, this whole out of body thing is really inconsequential. It's a metaphor. And it's a metaphor that we attach huge process to. So now we have all these processes for going out of body. First we get quiet, and then we light the incense, and then we relax our feet, and we do all this stuff, and then we lift up our hand, and then we look and see, is that my real hand, or is that my out of body hand? You do all this stuff, this process, and all you really need to do is switch data streams. It's just that simple. All this process is a metaphor and tools for you to switch a data stream. It only takes you a fraction of a second to switch a data stream, and it takes no ritual, no process whatsoever. You see, so if you're out of body, when you're out of body and your out of body wants to go out of body, you can do that. But now look at all the process you'd have. Your out of body would have to lay down and relax its feet and do all this stuff. You see, and it's just all this unnecessary process. Whereas all it needs to do is just switch data stream, and that's very much like teleporting, which is the way you get around when you're out of body, right? When you're out of body or you're remote viewing, you want to go someplace, you have an intent, you're there. You teleport, you switch data streams. Well, you can get into it that way too. It took me a long time to figure this out. I was with Bob Monroe, and I learned to do I relaxed my feet, and then my knees, and did the whole thing, just like many of you do. I went through all that process, and it takes you a while to do that. And yeah, I could get out of body whenever I wanted to, but I had to do all this process to do it. And then one day, after probably 1,000 times of doing this, I realized that, that was totally unnecessary. All I had to do was shift my data stream, and it was the same thing. I was there, just the same. And then I found out that I could split my data stream, and I could get 2 data streams at once, and I could put a little process. So I could be in an out-of-body state, and I could be in this state. So all these things are available to you, but you have beliefs, and you have rituals, and things that you do that then become necessary, because otherwise you can't focus your intent to do what you want to do. Because, I couldn't do that. If I just sat here and said, switch a data stream, how would you do that? How do you switch data streams? It's simple. It's just your intent. And it's so simple that it's hard. Everybody misses it because it couldn't be that simple, right? So it is that simple. But it takes practice. Yes, I've been doing this for a long time. I started with Bob Monroe in 1972 and haven't stopped since. So it's been a long time. But I just point this out, that your processes that you go through are tools that you use that are really not fundamental to anything. Out of body doesn't have anything to do with your body. It has nothing to do with your body. You are consciousness. You are attached, if you will, but you're playing a virtual body in a virtual reality game. That virtual reality game and that virtual body are nothing but information. It's just data. So scientists are finding out that electrons aren't really small masses of charge. They're information. A point with attributes of charge and attributes of mass. Well, that's all your body is. It's just, calculated points from a server somewhere. The real you is the consciousness, the free will awareness unit that's in charge, that makes all the choices and the decisions. Well, you can switch. How much trouble is it to switch from one website to another? How hard is it to switch from World of Warcraft to The Sims or some other virtual reality? Well, it's just simple. You turn the switch, right? You put in another URL, change your intent, and there it is. Now you're in a different reality frame. All you got to do is switch data streams. And it's what keeps us from doing that is it's the fear and the ego. The fear is I can't do that. If I do that, I'll just be kidding myself. It'll just be my imagination. And you have all this stuff built up to where you can't do it because you have all this stuff to get through. You miss your rituals because we get very tied to our rituals. I know the first time I learned to meditate sitting in a chair. And that's the way I meditated. The first probably 500 times I meditated, I sat in a chair. And one time I said, I'm going to lie down and meditate lying down in the bed. Couldn't do it. Like I tried, nothing happened. And it was plain that you can't meditate lying down in the bed. You can only meditate sitting up in a chair. But I worked at it for a while, and then I found out it really didn't make any difference. You can meditate lying down, sitting, standing, and then walking, and other things. You can spread that out. But we get so habituated to the way we do things that they become our rituals, and we need them. And we try something different, and it doesn't work. It's impossible, so then we give up. But you have to have persistence to get through those rituals. All right, so we've been through that. Now, the the free will awareness unit's quality, ability, and intent, along with the physical reality's avatar rule set and the psi uncertainty principle, sets the constraints for everything that you, the free will awareness unit, can experience. Okay? So there's all this potential experience you have, but your quality, that means how much you've grown up, your ability, how much you've learned to control all that noise in your mind, how much you've practiced your ability to sit still a long time, your intent, how focused is that intent? Is it just a broad intent that sort of do good things or have a good time or have fun? That sort of, what's your intent? It should be very focused, very specific. Along with the rule set, okay? The avatar's the rule set only allows you to do certain things. You can't do anything you want. You have to do things within the rules of your avatar and its rule set. Okay, and the psi uncertainty principle. Now, those of you who haven't read my book, you don't know what that is, but what that says is that you can break the rules. You can break the rule set if you like. You can hack the consciousness system as long as you maintain a certain amount of plausible deniability. That's a lawyer's term, right? There's plausible deniability. We can't prove it. So that's the idea, and there's reasons for that, but I won't go into them here. You can get that someplace else, but that's just a rule. That there's always plausible deniability for you to run roughshod over the rule set, which you can do. You don't have to abide by the rules here. You can hack the system, but not blatantly. All right. Well, the thing is, if that tells us if those things are what constrain us, then how do you loosen constraints? How do you get rid of these constraints? Well, you raise your quality, get rid of your fear, belief. There you go. You get rid of all the junk that's in your mind. You hone your ability to walk the talk, which means good practices, good health, good diet, consistent effort, open-minded skepticism. All those things are important. You have to have a clear and focused intent, and you need humility. For example, if you grandstand or show off or demonstrate your abilities, the psi uncertainty principle will limit you. So, your ego limits you. Okay. Non-physical entities, what are they? Who are they? Well, let's start with the number one non-physical entity in existence, and that would be the larger consciousness system. Okay? The larger consciousness system is the biggest, most fundamental, and most significant non-physical entity, being, thing, system that there is in our reality, in our larger reality. Okay? The larger conscious system is an evolving, aware, conscious information system with purpose and intent. What are you? You're also an evolving, aware, conscious information system with purpose and intent. Okay? All conscious entities can be described in the exact same way: an evolving, aware, conscious information system with purpose and intent. Except their purposes and intents are different. You should always be open but skeptical about the purpose and intent of any entity you interact with. And that's true here in this physical reality, in the out-of-body reality, in a dream reality, whatever. That's just a general little piece of wisdom there. You should be skeptical but open, okay, about the purpose and intents of any entity you interact with. What you see, what you imagine, what you expect, what you guess, what you interpret, or what you are told is often not what it seems to be. Again, there's the movie, there's the drama, there's the story going on, and that's really not all that important. There's the choices that you have to make as you interact with that drama and that story, And that's where the action is. That's where the rubber really meets the road. And if you get completely absorbed with the drama and you miss, oh, that was a bad choice for the wrong reason, for the wrong intent, then you grow from that. You see, that's what it's all about. Okay. So let's talk about connections with other entities, since we're all about entities. In various VRs, connection is typically through a mutually open intent. Okay. A connection and communication is best when there's no fear or no ego or beliefs, no judging, no analyzing or assuming to muddy the interpretation of the data. Okay. To establish a communication, one simply needs an address, a context, and or a relationship is important, but names are not. You notice that when you go out of body and the first thing you say is, well, what's your name? You know, you meet somebody out there and they usually go, name? Oh, okay, call me George. You know, it's that sort of thing. Generally, they don't relate to names because that's not significant. That's only significant here in this virtual reality, and in the larger reality, that's not it. Intent is significant. So if you had an interaction with an entity, all you have to do is think about that entity and that interaction, and that makes the connection. You don't need a name. Names are irrelevant. See, that's a little pigeonhole that we put on people here, but it's not a thing. So intent is the key to making these connections. Okay, so when you're interacting with other entities, you have to read between the lines. You have to ask, what's the point? What are the choices? Those are the questions you need to ask about it. What's the point of all of this? Why am I doing this? Why am I getting this picture? Why did I run into these entities? Why is this happening? Because often the experience is custom made for you. Because you're here to learn and grow up, and sometimes you get things that are, sometimes you're just interacting, but sometimes that interacting is guided. So always ask, what are the choices? What's the point? What can I learn from this? All right, communicating with dead people. Now we're talking about this physical reality, right? People die and the channel goes up, or somebody goes up and talks to Uncle Fred, who's been gone for a decade. Again, the past is done. It leaves nothing but a supremely complete probability record. And there you would access that from the database. If you want to talk to Uncle Fred, then you actually don't have an Uncle Fred anymore, because that was 10 years ago. Uncle Fred's a consciousness. He's a free will awareness unit when he was Uncle Fred. When Uncle Fred dies here, the body, as Uncle Fred dies, then the free will awareness unit that was Uncle Fred moves on, does other things. It doesn't say, well, I'm going to have to sit around for, the next 100 years in case somebody has a question for me. See? That's where the idea of sitting on clouds playing harps, passing the time, must have come from. So you don't just sit around and wait for somebody to get in touch with you. You move on. Well, when the medium talks to Uncle Fred, there's a couple of things going on. One, the data comes out of the database that was Uncle Fred. That's fixed because Uncle Fred had certain numbers of feelings, ideas, thoughts, things he did, things he thought about but didn't do, everything, right? This isn't a physical database of all the physical stuff like, how tall was he and, that sort of thing. This is a consciousness database of everything that was in his consciousness. So it's everything. This database is very complete. And the database is arranged by probability. It's not only everything that Uncle Fred did, but it's everything that Uncle Fred could have done, whether he did it or not, and the probability that he would have done it based on all the past experience that defined Uncle Fred. It's a probabilistic system. So when a channel or when one of you guys talks to your Uncle Fred, you generally are accessing this database. And yes, it is exactly Uncle Fred. Talks like Uncle Fred, looks like Uncle Fred, has all of Uncle Fred's mannerisms, has all of Uncle Fred's memory, has all of Uncle Fred's feelings, all the data And he can tell you things that nobody else but Uncle Fred could tell you. He could tell you about the gold he hid under, the floorboard under his bed, and you can go then and look that up and you say, I must have been Uncle Fred, because who else would know that? Well, it's the database. Now, you can ask that Uncle Fred things about the present, things he wouldn't know about. He's been dead for 10 years, and you can say, Uncle Fred, who should I vote for in the next election? Because you value his opinion. You say, well, one of two things happens here. One is that you get the probable answer. Well, you always are getting probable answers unless you ask for something else. You could actually ask for, I'd like to talk to Uncle Fred, but I'd like him to tell me the 10th most probable thing that he would have said. And then you'll get a different Uncle Fred. You won't get the Uncle Fred's, now he'd be a little quirky, a little off. Wouldn't say things just right. But mostly we intend, but sloppily, that we want what he did do. That Uncle Fred that lived in the things that he did do and thought about, rather than the things that he could have done but didn't. But if we're not good with our intent, if our intent's sloppy, you might end up in that probable database getting data that's a mishmash of various things. So that's why it's so important that your intent is precise. If your intent's not precise, the intent is your query to the database. And if you query a database with a broad query, you get a bunch of junk back. Right? Go to Google and put in love, and you'll get 6 million replies, right? Of which you can't find what it is you're looking for. But if you go there and put in something very specific, you'll get just what you want back out. Well, it's the same way when you're querying databases. You have to be very specific. Okay, let's see. The other thing that can happen, I said there was a couple of things could happen. The other thing that could happen is that the larger consciousness system may want to help you out, give you a little nudge, give you an opportunity to make a choice that would be very good for you. And the larger consciousness system can talk through Fred's data, if you will, Fred's history, as an interface. The larger conscious system will interface with you any way that works. It wants you to succeed, and it'll interface with you in any way that works with you. So if you're a very religious person and you're meditating and you're reaching out for some knowledgeable source, you'll find Gabriel, you'll find Mary, you'll find somebody that you're willing to listen to, because then when it tells you through that interface, you'll get it and you'll accept it more. If it was, instead of Mary, it was a talking two-headed dog, you wouldn't pay any attention at all to what it said. Some two-headed dog told me I needed to grow up or something. What did it know? You'd have no idea. But if Mary tells you need to grow up, you take that seriously, because you take Mary seriously. And it does that with all of us. So we get connections in a way that work for us. And your guides, you talk about guides. Your guides are just your personal interface to the larger conscious system. And if you've had guides for a long time, they have their own personalities, they have senses of humor, it's just like we are. Okay, but is there some entity out there sitting on a cloud playing his harp, waiting for you to ask a question as his guide? No, that's not true either. The larger conscious system just bubbles up a guide to interface with you through that interface, and it only makes sense for that interface to be consistent. So every time it's the same sense of humor, it's the same kind of voice, it's the same sort of connection, because that builds up trust. That builds up a connection like that. So the larger conscious system can use Uncle Fred as its interface to talk to, his niece or his nephew, whoever's, or the medium that's working for the niece or the nephew. That's not a problem either. So you get the probable Uncle Fred, what Uncle Fred probably would have said, given all his history, all his thoughts and feelings, or you get the larger consciousness system, or you get, just something straight out of the database, if it's out of Uncle Fred's own tongue. So I'm reminded of an anecdote that somebody told me, that they were a channel was channeling a dead person for somebody, and that dead person told the client, he says, you should go talk to your aunt or something, because your your godchild or some relative fell off their bike and hurt themselves, and by the way, how are they doing now? It's that sort of thing. And well, he didn't know that there was any problem like that happened. So afterwards, they went and they called up and said, yes, certainly, the child did fall off the bike. Well, you see, what's that about? The story is about a child falling off a bike, and how are they? Inquiring as to their health. Well, that's just a story. It doesn't mean anything. That's not significant. What was significant was that the larger consciousness system had a message for this person. Here's a person who wasn't really too aware of the larger reality. Well, after that, this idea of channeling and talking to dead people took on a whole new significance, right? Gosh, reality is a whole lot bigger than I thought. I talked to this entity through this channel, and they told me about a relative of mine, about what happened to him that I didn't know. And certainly the medium didn't know. So suddenly it becomes more real, more imperative, more compelling. And that was the point. So that was the larger conscious system giving this person a little nudge. Hey, reality's bigger than you think it is. Wake up. Go find out. Study. Read some books. Get working. It's that sort of thing. Didn't have anything to do with a little girl on her bike or whatever. That was just, the story. So these things can happen. And that works for several different reasons. As I said, it could be just the database, could be the large conscious system, or it could be the database getting an upload of information so it knows which person they would vote for, even though they died 10 years before that election took place. So any of those things can happen. This is a digital information system. It has very few constraints. So digital information systems are immensely versatile. The kind of magic that computers work on making movies and animation, and digital systems can do almost anything. There's very few constraints on how it works. Okay, communicating unilaterally with other entities and them with you. The receiver has to have an open or unspecified or weakly closed intent. In other words, if you want to communicate to somebody, if you want to have a conversation, you can do that, but they have to have either an open to it, be unspecified, then either open or closed. They're not even thinking about it, which means most people then are open, or weakly closed, where they said, well, I don't really want to know about that, but they don't really maintain a sharp intent for that. It's just kind of a weak, fuzzy intent and doesn't work very well. So you can pass information to them, and other entities can pass information to you. And if you don't like what you're getting, or if you'd like more of what you're getting, then you have to adjust the valve of what it comes through, and that's your intent. If your intent is open or undecided or weak, then they will push information to you and you will receive it. If your information is sharp and clear, then you can turn it up, turn it off, however you want to do it. So that's the kind of way that works on a two-way street. Now what happens is that sometimes people will get something they don't want. I'm getting too much information, or I don't want to get information from these sources anymore, because it frightens them, because it worries them. Well, if you're frightened, if you have fear, then that's your connection to it. You can't close it off because you're connected to it through your fear. You see? So now you don't have a good, tight intent, because your intent is, I'd like to turn that off. But what if I can't? What if I can't turn that off? Maybe it can, all this fear basically ruins your tight focus on your intent. So now it's not a simple intent. It's a wandery, wishy-washy intent that doesn't do any good. So if you can modify that if you wish. Yes, a lot of people didn't know that they could pass information to other people. Most parents don't know that they can have these conversations with their teenage children, and they'll actually listen through the non-physical. Let's see. Here's one. Is experiencing the non-physical useful? That depends entirely on you and on your intent. Here's two questions that are very important. What do you want to accomplish, In other words, what's your purpose? And why do you want to accomplish that? That's your intent. Those two questions will have a very strong impact on the nature and content of your experience. And again, that's true of any reality frame, but particularly the out-of-body, because it doesn't have a tight rule set. It's not so constrained as to what it can do and what it can come up with. Coming up with a two-headed talking dog here in physical reality is tough, but a two-headed talking dog and an out-of-body, well, that's not hard. You see, that's not a thing that's difficult to produce there. So that's important. The answer to those two questions, if the answer to those two questions is whatever, okay, the question is, what do you want to accomplish? Whatever. And why do you want to accomplish it? I don't know. If that's it, then basically what you get back is whatever. And what the value is that's the value of it. So it's your intent, your purpose. What do you want to do? Why do you want to do it? If that's not clear, you'll get junk back. You'll get stuff that doesn't relate. It'll be like a whole disconnected series of stuff that doesn't really connect. Whereas if you do have good purpose and good intent, then you'll get very focused stuff that's more useful to you, stuff that you can grow from. So that what do you want to accomplish and why do you want to accomplish it is very important to have that in a very clear, focused, precise way. And if what you want to accomplish is good things, I want to have a good trip, I want to have a good experience, I want to do good things, too vague. That doesn't specify to the system exactly what you want, so you won't get really what you want that way. Okay. Fear, ego, and a lack of clear and concise intent or purpose is the biggest problem for most people. Well, if reality is not really working for you, then what should you do? Well, what you should do is get rid of the fear, ego, and have a clear, concise intent and a purpose. That will help a lot. Last one, typical problems in achieving useful non-physical experience. And a subset of that is getting stuck. A lot of people get stuck. Okay, I'll just go through some of the common ones here. If you notice any of those are in your life, then maybe it will help. One is a fear loop called "Is it real?" or "I need certainty." Basically, that's a fear of uncertainty, and the person who's having an experience, as soon as he has the experience, as soon as he meets the entity, as soon as the out-of-body thing starts, it's, am I fooling myself? Is this real? Am I just making this up? Et cetera, et cetera. It goes through that. Well, of course, because you have the fear that you're not doing it right, you're making it up, you're being a fool, et cetera, then you don't really have a useful experience. And because you don't have a useful experience, your fear gets worse. And eventually you just quit and give up. Okay, the bad things that might happen to me, the monsters. There's the monsters fear loop. This fear creates, encourages, and enables the monsters that create the fear. So you see, it's a self-feeding loop. Okay, the I can't do it, it doesn't work for me fear loop. The reason you can't do it is because you fear you can't do it, which creates more fear of failure. If you're afraid you're going to fail, you're more likely to fail. Okay? So there's a lot of other loops that you can get stuck in. There's the hero loop. Okay, that's kind of the combat martial arts good versus evil loop. The disaster loop. All the things that can happen to us. The earthquakes and the lightning strikes and the big waves and overpopulation. Too many mosquitoes, anything that bothers you. There's the conspiracy loop, self-explanatory. The pointless, purposeless exploration loop. If all of that was the whatever loop. If all of your explorations are pointless and purposeless, then that can create the no purpose gives you no good experiences. All your experiences are just kind of they don't really connect. You don't really learn much from them, so eventually you quit. So it's a self-defeating kind of thing. There's the gee whiz loop. That's like the carnival ride. You want to your reason for going out of body or for doing whatever you do is because it's neat. It's like getting on a roller coaster. Everybody puts their hands in the air and screams as they go downhill. It's this kind of thing. You deal with the monsters and you do this and that, and it's kind of a carnival ride. That's the gee whiz loop. There's the adventure game loop, and all of these loops create situations that then feed on themselves. But that doesn't mean that it's not good to experience any of these things. Experiencing them is just fine, but don't get stuck in a loop where that experience then biases the next to be the same kind of experience, which biases the next to be the same kind of experience, and you get caught in the loop, and that's all the kind of experiences you have. So you can get into a rut that becomes a kind of a self-perpetuating and marginal value. So that's really what you want to avoid. What's interesting is that individuals run all of these same loops. If you're running this loop in out of body, you're running this loop here in a physical reality, and you're probably running the same loop in every reality in which you express yourself. Because that loop is an expression of you, what's inside you at the being level. So if you're in these loops, you're probably in these loops in all your realities. It's just easier to see in the out-of-body reality. Here there's so much complex stuff going on, it's kind of hard to make out the loops. But you can see them better sometimes in the out-of-body. So if you're in any of these loops, look around, and all your others, probably your dreams are the same way. And probably your physical reality is the same way. The remedy is get rid of the junk, get rid of the fear and the ego and the belief systems. Okay? And get rid of the lack of a low entropy. Fix the lack of a low entropy intent and purpose. You need a low entropy intent and purpose. So the advice is to try to understand the significance of what you experience, what you can learn, how you can grow from it. Just like in the physical reality, one can wander around in the non-physical just as cluelessly, interacting perhaps in exciting but meaningless ways that have no big picture purpose or direction. Okay? These become traps at worst or missed opportunities at best. Okay, a few things to remember. Normal communication is an exchange of metaphors and symbols that must be interpreted on both ends. Okay. For an example, one cannot share an experience. You can only describe an experience to someone else who must then interpret your description in terms of their own experience. Every experience is yours and yours alone. It's personal. It's subjective. Experience is subjective. You can't share it with anybody. You can describe it, and that other person will interpret it based on their background, their history, and what they think. It won't be your experience. It'll be your experience as interpreted by them, which is not your experience at all. Okay, what you see is not what you're given, it's what you interpret it to be. Consciousness and intent are the only active ingredients. All the rest is more or less useful tools, habits, and rituals. You can switch a consciousness intent on a dime. Rituals take time. Habits take time. Models of the non-physical reality. And we've got a lot of sub-models. There's not very many big models, but there's lots of little pieces of models. You read on the web and in books about all these levels. There's 14 levels of this, and then another 6 levels of something else, and you have frequency and vibration levels, and you have energy and light and chakras and structure and locale 1 and locale 2, and all of these things are just metaphors. There is no light. There are no chakras. There is no energy, no structure, no locales. all you have is consciousness system and your connection to that consciousness system with your consciousness. You get data stream, and you interpret that data stream to be whatever you interpret it to be. And your fear and your ego and your belief make a huge difference, and the preciseness of your intent and the quality with which you go into it all make a huge difference. So when we use light, light's a metaphor, just like energy is a metaphor. Energy is a metaphor for being able to affect something, because we need energy to affect something. So if I'm healing you with my mind, and I use the metaphor that light is good, dark is bad. I see your energy body, I see your etheric body, and I see the dark stuff in it, which is the bad stuff, and then I send light on it to make it light. All of those are just metaphors to help me focus my intent on changing the probable future of your health. You see, it's just tools. There is no light, there is no energy, there's only intent, okay, that moves things. It's all consciousness and intent. Okay, same with chakras. Chakras aren't real things, they're not fundamental, they're just another way to slice and dice all the metaphysical stuff and connect it with the body. Of course, it has nothing to do with the body. It's just the data is the body. It's just like the elf. Do elves have chakras? No. The user, is the consciousness. So it doesn't have anything to do with the body. So it's just metaphors. But they're useful metaphors. It's a way to separate the functions of various kinds of things together with different ideas. And of course it gets related to the body, because we believe the physical is real, so we relate it to the body, and that makes it more real, because that's in your solar plexus, and that's in your throat, and that's, we get all that, so it makes it more real for us if it makes it more physical, so we put things in the body. But it's just a nice way to dice and partition out. It's a functional model. Structure, locales, all these things are just metaphors. They're not real things. See, that's kind of how we started this. We measure effects, results, and then we assume models. Well, all these things like energy and light or something, they're models for us, for causes. So we don't want to confuse models of reality with reality. See how that thing that was so simple and everybody knew immediately what I meant when I said that is really pretty complex and has a lot of levels of meaning. Don't confuse reality with the models of reality. Mostly what we deal with as far as causality goes are models. All right, let's see. So they're all metaphors. They may be useful or they may not be useful, but they're not fundamental. Now, I don't want that to seem like I'm saying that tools and metaphors are second class, not really useful, or you shouldn't do them. You shouldn't have these rituals for doing things. That's not true. Most of us need those things. We can't focus our intent without them, and particularly if we've been habituated to them. So I'm not saying give all that stuff up. I'm saying just be aware it's not fundamental. And don't try to use other people's tool sets. So when you use somebody else's tool sets, they may be great for that person, but they may not be good for you. Use a tool that resonates with you. And you can make up your own tools. Nothing sacred about tool sets. But every group, every ism, every other website in the metaphysical area has their own tool set. Oh, you breathe like this. You sit like this. You do all these things. You think of it this way. And they're all tool sets. And if they work for you, fine, use them. If they don't work for you, make up your own tools or find somebody else's tools that do work. There's just nothing fundamental about them. But they are mostly necessary for us, because if I can't send light to him to heal that black spot, I have to be able to focus my intent very precisely without that visual aid, and that's hard to do because I grew up in this physical virtual reality, and that's the way I think of things. I have to do something to make something happen. If I don't send light to that dark spot, well, how can I affect the dark spot? I'd have to go over there with a blowtorch and burn it out, or have to take a knife and cut it out, or do something else, you see, because I feel like I have to do something to affect something, because that's my belief being in this reality. It's not true in a larger reality, but I carry those beliefs. Those are cultural beliefs. I carry them with me. So now I have to have all this process, otherwise my intent can't fathom the idea that I just say, heal. No, that won't work. Couldn't possibly work, you see? And because you kind of don't see that as possible because it's so foreign to your belief system, you reject it. So it doesn't work. So you have to do process. You have to make black stuff, and then you have to get rid of the black stuff, and you have to get rid of it some way so you shine light on it, or you can burn it, or you can cut it out, or take it on yourself. You know, that wouldn't be a very clever thing to do, but you could do that. Whatever in your mind, you know, will change the probable realities that way. So if you take it on yourself, I'm going to take that black spot from you and take it on because that's the only thing I know how to do, then the probability of me being ill just went up. The probability of you know, maintaining that illness just went down. It's not a clever way to go about healing, but some people do that. It's the same with auras. I need to see your picture to see your aura. You don't need a picture. The other person can be on the other side of the planet or on some other planet. It doesn't make any difference. All the consciousness is netted. All the information's in the database. When you see an aura, you're not looking at some thing around a digital computed body. You are getting data out of the database, and you are receiving it in a format that you're interpreting. Okay. Yes, you can take an electrostatic meter and you can measure that there are fields around here. Well, that's just part of the rule set. So you don't need the hank of hair to in the picture or any of that stuff. So all of these are tools. So that might help you as you go through more of these experiences. I'm just kind of giving you a little smorgasbord. I know I left lots of stuff out, but I just want to kind of cut through and say, here's another way of viewing what you've been doing for the last week. Another way of looking at the results and where it came from and what does it mean and why is it like the way it is, and you know, how do I get there, or how do I get there more easily? Some of you struggle, and out of body is a huge struggle because you got all this process you got to do, and because you're not sure you're doing it, that fear of not doing it keeps you from doing it. And then you want to have somebody else's experience. If you can't roll out of body and then look down at your body lying on the bed, you figure you're not doing it right. I'm not really out of body. That's somebody else's experience. You don't have to do that. You just teleport. You're in a different data stream. You know, and you can kind of move around wherever you want that way. So anyway, that's all I've got. I hope it helps. I hope you take something back, some news that you can use in seeing a bigger picture and help you interpret your experiences in some way that can make a little more sense. But that's it. Thank you very much. Now we can go on and have Q&A. I guess we're coming up on dinner, are we not?
Yeah, we are.
We're coming up to dinner. You can have as much Q&A as we want after dinner.
Great.
And I'll sit here until you pass out. Where I pass out, whichever comes first.